You're listening to the Common Descent Podcast. And welcome to Spookulative Evolution.
Hello, David.
Hello, Will.
And hello, listeners. Welcome back to Spook-E.
Spookulative Evolution 2024.
If this is your first time joining us for Spook-E for October, we each year do a Halloween-themed series called Spookulative Evolution, where we take a look at some classic and famous and popular creatures, monsters, mythical things, and say, what would it take for a creature to actually evolve those traits? What pressures, what lifestyle, what group of animals would give us something that looks like what we call this monster? This is just meant to be a fun and intriguing series. We're not making any definitive statements about any of these creatures.
Nope.
But it's one of our favorites. And this year, we are doing Tiny Monsters.
Tiny Monsters.
Tiny Monsters.
I'm so tickled by this theme. It's such a fun theme.
We always do themes, and usually our themes are pretty, concise. Right. This is kind of an odd one.
Yeah.
This is more of a vibes thing. As long as they're small and kind of monstery, they fit. So we'll get to see some weird ones this year. So I'm excited to see what all you guys guess about what we might be doing. For this first episode, we're doing Gremlins.
Gremlins! When we came up with the idea for Tiny Monsters, this was immediately the first one on the list.
Yep. I love Gremlins so much. They are one of my favorites. Now, Gremlins, made famous by the movies.
Yes, in the 80s.
But have a lot more background to them than just those two films. So we will be going over all of that first, then we'll be talking about what it would take to make a gremlin.
Yeah, what would it take to evolve gremlins with the tools of biological evolution?
Absolutely.
Tell me all about gremlins, Will.
Happily. So happily. I had so much fun learning about this one. Gremlins are tiny, mischievous creatures. In the movies, they're very goblin-y, and they're just chaotic, destructive little monsters.
Yeah, they're not necessarily murderous or predatory like a lot of movie monsters tend to be. They're just causing chaos.
I think I know Freudian stuff is pretty much not legit, considered legit these days, but I think id is the right term of just that base instinct,
right? No
impulse control,
just chaotic evil.
Just chaotic evil. Just anything that you think is entertaining, they do it. They do it without thinking about it for their own safety or anybody else's.
Yes,
chaotic little monsters, and that is at the core of what Gremlins were traditionally. They were chaotic, but more so destructive and disruptive little imp-like beings. They are also a fairly recent mythical creature. They came around in the 20th century during World War II.
Mm-hmm.
These were little creatures blamed for the malfunctioning of military equipment, particularly airplanes.
Yeah, this is sort of where the term became popular. Is gremlins are what are causing these malfunctions.
Yes, they would blame when something went wrong on gremlins. That gremlins were in the machines, they were tinkering with stuff, they were cutting wires, they were loosening bolts.
Chewing on power cables.
They were in there messing things up, and it was a way to explain unexplainable, no idea why this went wrong. But it went wrong at the worst time, so it must be gremlins.
Yeah, in very much the same way that you might blame mysterious creatures for, when your stuff goes missing.
Yeah.
It's exactly. Where did my things go? Oh, the trolls took it,
yes,
or whatever.
Exactly. The underwear gnomes.
Mm-hmm.
It's that kind of thing. It was particularly made popular by the Royal Air Force of British pilots during World War II. And I saw it cited specifically one stationed in Malta in the Middle East and India during the 1920s.
Interesting.
So it was a we know where it got started, really, and then it spread on from there. The first, printed record of them is a poem about the gremlins and what it's like to deal with them, printed in a journal of Aeroplane in 1929. There have been others that claim that the concept goes back to World War I, but I and the person writing the article didn't see any evidence actually connecting it to World War I.
Interesting.
But there have been people who have said it does, which could just be a furthering of the myth.
Sure. Well, all those dates that you're saying are also before World War II. Mm-hmm. So it's got started somewhere in those earlier times.
And yes, the concept came around before World War II, but that's when it became truly popular. Mm-hmm. The name there's a couple of ideas of where the name might have come from. It could be derived from an Old English term, gremain, to vex.
Okay.
Which is very fitting for what they're doing. It also might be a blend of Goblin and Fremlin, which is a manufacturer of the most popular beer that the Royal Air Force was drinking at the time. So it might be that it was a combination of those words.
Yeah.
And initially, when Gremlins were thought up, they were accused of having enemy sympathies.
Right. Yeah. These are working for the other team.
Absolutely.
Like, yeah, the enemies sent these over.
Yes, they shipped them in.
Yes.
Then they would hear stories of the enemies having similar problems and go, okay, well, no, Gremlins are equal opportunity agents of chaos.
Some of them are on our side.
Yeah. They are just causing trouble for everybody. We are not so different, you and I.
Yes.
We both have to deal with the Gremlins.
The Gremlins are not inherently anti-fascist. They're just here to cause chaos.
Yes. And that was kind of what most historians look back and folklorists consider them kind of the point of Gremlins.
Yeah, I guess pro-fascist for the joke that I was trying to make. But yes, the point of Gremlins is that they're causing trouble.
That they are a form of buck passing is what it was called. That it's a way in the middle of combat and in high tension situations when something goes wrong to laugh it off.
Yes. To
blame something innocuous and silly and ridiculous and not blame your fellow pilots, your engineers, blame each other. It is a way to take a stressful situation, which is your plane malfunctioning up in the middle of the air while potentially being shot at.
Right.
Like as stressful a scenario as human beings really can be put into, and bring it down to something that you can laugh about.
Yes.
So it very likely served a morale boosting effect to blame these nonsensical little imps with these malfunctions instead of getting actually stressed and panicking about it.
Yeah. Well, and that like we said before, that is a very common human reaction to things.
Yes.
Is to blame something silly or blame it on the dog or blame it on whatever to defuse the situation, to avoid blaming it on other people.
Exactly. And this is also kind of seen in the fact that as time went on, the Gremlins kind of became mascots almost for some groups in some situations. You'd see them painted and like drawn on the sides of planes and, used in propaganda material. Mm-hmm. There's a whole bunch of propaganda posters and like workplace posters that are safety guides. And they're saying, hey, be mindful and be wary. Gremlins are out to get you. Wear your safety glasses because they like to throw things at your eyes.
Yeah.
Make sure you get enough sleep because they like to mess with you when you're not fully awake. Like, here's safety things. We're going to use these little cartoon characters as you're not the one messing up.
Yes.
But make sure you're extra careful because they will make it harder for you.
Gremlins will get you.
Yep. I even saw one that was about when you're joining two pieces of metal, how to join them because this kind of joinery is more easy to break. Gremlins like to break this.
Yes.
It's harder for them to break this properly welded thing. And it's so like they got used in this kind of a useful way. And like the Women's Air Force service pilots, WASPs, took the gremlin as their mascot, and specifically a gremlin named Fifinella, which was a female gremlin wearing a WASP uniform, became their mascot. There is even a plane, the red gremlin, the B-17 Flying Fortress, named after the Gremlins.
Yep.
There's a car named the Gremlin. Like,
oh yeah.
Gremlins kind of became a little bit of a mascot, a little bit of a...
Yeah, it's an in-joke.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And for the most part, it was a very acknowledged, joke and spoof and whatnot. Though there are accounts of servicemen saying, no, literally.
Right.
I saw the little man on my wing. I saw them. And this is one of those where it's like, are you leaning into it further and
Right.
reporting more?
Are you committing to the bit?
Yep. Or is it stress from the situation?
Did you see something weird in a high stress situation?
And your brain took the first thing that you had, which was Gremlins, and placed it there.
Yep.
So there are some accounts of people claiming they're real, but for the most part, it is pretty common that it was a joke in and of itself.
Everyone was in on the joke.
Yeah. The only sort of majorly serious account I found was one person who, in a statement, said that they heard the voice of the gremlin in their plane. Complaining about them doing stuff wrong. They said they heard a gruff voice say, "How many times must you be told to obey orders and not tackle jobs you aren't qualified for? This is how it should be done," and then heard a musical twang as another cable came loose.
Oh no. Terrifying.
Which is, horrifying.
Yeah.
This does lead us into the next question, which is, what did Gremlins look like?
Yeah.
Which was very inconsistent. They had tons of variety.
Sure. Well, this sounds like this was effectively an oral tradition.
Yes.
That was being talked about, but that there wasn't a person who was the one doing gremlin art.
Exactly. There was not a canon gremlin lore. And so they had all sorts of different shapes and sizes and looks. It would vary from unit to unit, pilot to pilot. There were some common things. They tended to be small, which makes sense because they're getting into the machinery. Usually less than a foot tall. They often were little people, but would have impish features. Pointed ears, sometimes red eyes were listed. A lot of times longer, more like Pinocchio noses. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they would be described with sharp teeth and claws and be actually fairly monstrous. But a lot of the art you see for those posters I was talking about are more just these little kind of Martian looking-y dudes that are very just tiny cartoony humans. They often would be noted wearing clothing, sometimes just normal outfits, often pilot gear. They would often be wearing pilots' outfits and, airmen uniforms and stuff like that. Though I also found descriptions of them with furry pants, boots, bright red jackets, jaunty caps, all sorts of stuff. I think the most common one that I've seen is aviator goggles.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
That having aviator goggles on their head since they're going up with them.
Well, you got to protect your eyes.
Absolutely. You got to see what you're doing.
Yes.
You got important work to do. These nuts aren't going to unscrew themselves. There are also different types of gremlins that have been talked about and were described at certain times. People saying that there were different types of gremlins that did different damages. I found a couple of different lists of some of the different kinds of gremlins that were mentioned. Jockey gremlins like to hop on the wings and cause them to be off balance.
Sure.
Optics gremlins were known for sneaking into bomb sites and messing with bombardier aiming systems. Bomby gremlins took pleasure in riding on bombs and steering them off course. Full on Strangelove, Dr. Strangelove. Water gremlins crept into fuel lines and added water into the fuel. There was a poem I found, Wind-Sucking Gremlin, which I think is the one of the original poems that they were talking about by an unknown author. And I won't read the whole thing, but I'll read the section where they talk about the kinds of gremlins. And it says, "It is then that you see the gremlins, green and gamboge and gold, male and female and neuter, gremlins both young and old. White ones will wiggle your wingtips, male ones will muddle your maps, green ones will guzzle your glycol, females will flutter your flaps, pink ones will perch on your perspex and dance pirouettes on your prop. There's a spherical middle-aged gremlin who will spin on your stick like a top." And so there's this idea that there were a wide variety of different shapes and kinds and colors.
Yeah.
They would all be doing different things on different parts of the equipment. They first became notable and kind of solidified into fiction by the British author Roald Dahl, who is credited with the first getting the name outside of the Air Force and bringing it to the wider community. Roald, having served in the Air Force themselves, brought the story with them and wrote a book, a children's novel, The Gremlins, which were exactly as they were in the Air Force, little tiny people that messed with the fighters. They also added some new lore. The males are gremlins. The females are Fifinellas, which is where the wasp's name came from. Male children are widgets, and female children are flibberty gibbets.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yep.
Those are words that I know.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
That's very interesting.
I don't know if they originated here, but they might have
Yeah.
been made popular here. Shortly after, it was made into a picture book, and this led us into our first film versions of the Gremlins, which were in Looney Tunes.
Oh, interesting.
The Looney Tunes cartoons were the first, some of the major first animated and filmed versions of Gremlins. There's the 1943 Falling Hair, which is Bugs Bunny versus the Gremlin, the Gremlin, based off the book. And it's Bugs Bunny hanging on in an airfield and then getting messed with by a gremlin who has little airplane features. He's got wings on his head and a little plane tail for a tail. And it's just Bugs having to deal with this gremlin the whole time. Then they followed it up with 1944's Russian Rhapsody, which is Russian gremlins from the Kremlin.
Sure.
Being
Enemy gremlins.
Yep. Being sent to mess with Adolf Hitler and terrorize him while he tries to fly a plane.
So these are anti-fascist
Yes,
gremlins.
these are. When you said that earlier, I was like, oh, just wait. There is a cartoon. So those two were our first, like, animated visions of Gremlins. Then, in 1963, probably one of the most famous is The Twilight Zone, with William Shatner as a passenger on a plane that has a gremlin on the wing.
Oh.
Something
Yep.
on the wing. That's what that's from.
Oh, interesting.
Is a Twilight Zone episode where he is a passenger on a plane who's scared of flying and has a window seat. And when he opens it, there's this like kind of apish, ghoulish, weird looking dude on the wing. Mm-hmm. Just a full, and this one's a full human because it's a person in a costume.
Sure.
So it's not, they didn't.
This is not a cartoon.
Yes, exactly.
We needed it to be person-sized.
This is actual film. And they redid the story in the Twilight Zone movie in 1983. With slight differences, like in the William Shatner version, it more seems like the Gremlins just interested in the engine and like looking at it and doing damage by accident. And in the movie, it's like a little demon thing that is like actively tearing into the plane and like directing lightning strikes at it. And then the next year after that Twilight Zone movie, Gremlins.
The movie
Gremlins. 1984, directed by Joe Dante, produced by Steven Spielberg, and written by Chris Columbus, is the movie that made them truly famous. Mm-hmm. That made the term widely famous, that made the creatures famous, and became the definitive Gremlins for most people.
Yes. Yeah, now when you hear Gremlins, it's a pretty safe bet that most people's first thought is this film version of
Gremlins TM.
Yes, exactly.
These Gremlins.
Gizmo and Friends.
Absolutely. In the movie, these take on a very different nature than the classic stories. They are creatures, they are animals, and they are not inherently tied to just aircraft and machinery. There are references to their World War II stories in the movie, and claims that these gremlins are supposed to be those same gremlins. We have a World War II vet, Murray, who points at them and says, there they are, those are the gremlins I was talking about.
Yep.
In this movie, the concept is that they actually start out as mogwais, which are fuzzy little teddy bear things with bat ears. Gizmo is our mogwai for the movie. Utterly adorable. One of the cutest things ever to make it onto a movie screen. I love them. And that mogwais have 3 rules you have to abide by when taking care of a mogwai. No bright lights, especially no sunlight, because it'll kill them. Mm-hmm. Don't get them wet. Don't give them any water to drink. Don't give them a bath. And never feed them after midnight. And those are there because the sunlight will kill them, and they're just very sensitive to bright lights. The water causes them to multiply. Mm-hmm. As soon as they get wet, they sprout young versions of themselves out of their back, projectile. And the feeding after midnight, famously, is what turns them into gremlins.
Yes.
They go into a pupa state.
Yeah, they metamorphose.
Yes. Into these scaly, slimy-skinned, now no longer furry, and much taller and clawed and sharp-toothed gremlins.
Yes. Very demonish, very impish looking.
All of this was created for this version of Gremlins. None of those story beats have any deeper story lore that I'm familiar with or came across. If anyone does know if there was anything I'd love to know it, but I didn't come across it. So those were all made for these new films. There is a sequel, Gremlins 2, The New Batch, in 1990, that doesn't really add anything to most of that lore, and it's a wacky comedy, so the most it really adds is that evidently they are super easy to mutate into crazy X-Men-esque gremlins.
Pretty cool.
Yep. Some quick fun facts about the gremlins in this movie version. The concept for the gremlins was thought up by Chris Columbus when they heard rats and mice skittering around their attic.
Yep.
And said it sounded like a platoon of mice, and that it was very creepy hearing them skittering around in the dark, and just this idea of unseen skittering creatures.
Yep, causing trouble in the dark somewhere.
Yep. The creature design for Gizmo went through a couple of phases that they said that I thought were interesting. The first one was based off of a tarsier, small primates with big ears and big eyes, and just giving them a bit more cartoony proportions.
Yep. Yeah, if you haven't seen Gizmo, Gizmo looks a lot like a Furby.
Yes.
Or, more accurately, Furbies look a lot like Gizmo.
Yep, because that's what they were doing. They did another version that was a bit more puppy-esque, and then they landed on the final version. And the films have left a huge legacy. They've inspired tons of other films. It's thought likely that they inspired things like Ghoulies and Hobgoblins and Munchies and a bunch of those other small, critters.
Yeah, things that are kind of goblin-esque. Gremlins are very much that mold.
Yes, and so those movies that followed it and have that same kind of energy probably were following this inspiration. Also, just fun fact, this is one of the movies that gave us the PG-13 rating, because when it came out, it was PG, and Gremlins is a funnily scary movie or a really kind of scary, funny movie, depending on which way you look at it. Either way, it was a little bit scarier than people were prepared for PG rating, and it, along with, I think, a couple other movies at the time, but it was one of the movies that was one of the major reasons the Motion Picture Association created the PG-13 rating. And the final bit of background I have is that very recently in 2023, they made a Gremlins cartoon.
Oh.
Yeah. Gremlins, The Secret of the Mogwai, where they add in some lore. That's just fun to put in while we're putting in the background and lore of the creatures. The Mogwai are creatures from China, which we see in the movie.
Consistent with the movie.
Yep, that the dad of the main character finds Gizmo in a Chinese antique shop. In the show, they reveal that they were created by sibling gods, Fuxi and Nua, who disagreed on the nature of humanity, as to whether humans were innately good or innately bad. They created the Mogwai as a test for humanity. Here's this adorable creature with 3 rules you must follow to take care of it. If they can follow those rules and care for the Mogwai, then they are inherently good. If they can't, then they are inherently bad, is the test and the bet that they made with each other.
Right. And your punishment for being bad is that now you have gremlins.
Yes. And whichever god lost would not be able to create life anymore. And so, it was one of those classical mythical god tests. They gave it to humanity. Humanity fell in love with the Mogwai and immediately broke Rule 2 so that they could make a whole bunch.
Yep.
Because they all wanted one. And so they splashed water on them, made a whole bunch. And
we do.
Shortly after Rule 3 was broken, and now gremlins were destroying ancient China. And so Nua stopped the test, reverted them all back to Mogwai, and hid them away so that they'd be safe from gremlins. And then from humanity. And then that's where the show comes in, is people discover the secret society of Mogwai, and then an evil person gets a band of gremlins to try to take over China again.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's fun.
And that's about all the history of Gremlins. They aren't a super, deep and diverse history.
They're like a century old as mythologies go.
Exactly. Many of people our age's grandparents were some of the first people to spread the myths of these creatures, probably.
Yeah.
These are very recent. So we can now start jumping into our speculative evolution. But first, quick disclaimer. Every episode we like to do a magic disclaimer just to remind everyone that we can only evolve the things that are biologically possible and feasible. Magic, technology, and tools and like things that the creatures have, we can't really evolve those.
Right. We're focused on natural selection.
Yes.
Outside of that is beyond the scope of our self-set limitations for our game we're playing.
So we'll do as best we can to include those more supernatural things, but sometimes we just have to skip certain features that are too impossible to even include in the discussion.
Yes.
So how do we evolve a gremlin?
Yeah, this is a really fun background to get to play around with. Typically, so when we think about evolution, the two major factors that determine the features that we see in any particular species are its lifestyle and what it's doing with all those features, and its ancestry.
Yes.
As you're describing gremlins as like little creatures that are messing with stuff and making trouble, and in particular, talking about them being in Asia causing havoc to ancient cities and stuff, the two groups of animals that it made me think of right away were primates and rodents.
Yes.
Like that these are two groups of mammals that are both, in some cases, fairly human-like.
Yep.
They can walk around on hind feet. Primates more so, but there are plenty of rodents that have like little manipulating hands.
Absolutely,
and stuff.
yeah. They can still hold on to food with their front paws, which is not something a lot of animals can do.
Yes. And which are both famous for messing with human stuff.
Yeah, they're both very resourceful pest species.
Yeah, like some of them are famous for doing some of the things that we were describing with gremlins.
Yep.
Like, getting in, like chewing on cables and pulling out wires and messing up stuff. Yeah, there are primates and rodents and other animals that do that.
Yes. Well, and like the primate stuff feels so fitting, especially for the movie Gremlins, where it's like they're putting on hats and like they're obviously curious and get bored and do stuff.
They're also very vocal. Certainly in the movie versions of them, they're very vocal. They speak.
Yep.
Like in the movie version, they kind of talk.
Yes.
Like they do say words from time to time. So they are vocally communicative. They're also social.
Yes, extremely.
They are gregarious. Like even in the old, World War II versions, they were describing, you've got males and females and old ones and young ones all together in like a group.
And in like the posters, there are pictures of them working together to like pull off pranks. Mm-hmm. Like one's holding a thing while the other one launches something off of it and stuff like that. So absolutely, they are teamwork. They are cooperative chaos bringers.
Yes. Also, the description of, again, in the movies and then some of the previous descriptions have those big ears and those claws and things like that. Some of which are, we see those in a lot of other species. Although primates tend not to have claws.
Yeah, there are clawed primates, but that's not the common.
But I do like the idea of, you mentioned tarsiers and certain primates that formed the inspiration for them. The idea of a creature with big bat-like ears, which would be very useful if you're moving around at times or in spaces where it's hard to see.
Yes.
Which I don't know if it's part of the lore officially in going back back to the before times that they were creeping around in the dark. Mm-hmm. The movies for sure implement that. Yeah, they can't be in the sunlight. So the idea that it's like a nocturnal species that is well adapted for getting around where it can't see, which means that it's moving around either at night or in dark places where humans are going to have trouble keeping an eye on them.
Yes, absolutely. I definitely love the idea of them being nocturnal and these underbrush, down in under our feet and under the floorboards and that kind of places type creature. One of the tricky things that we get if we do with the movie Gremlin is that they metamorphose from a very mammalian to a almost more reptilian or amphibian-esque creature.
They're still very mammal-esque.
Yeah, their body shape.
Their body shape, they've got the big ears, they've got mammal-like facial features. Mostly it's that they've lost most of their fur.
Yeah, and they've gained
and they're kind of scaly.
And they're also slimy. Like they're very often shown with like slime and glisten to their skin. So yeah, it's really the skin that is no longer mammally, which
Yeah.
is interesting.
And we don't get mammals that metamorphose.
Mm-hmm.
That's a thing we see in insects. It's a thing we see in amphibians. And amphibians, for sure, can be slimy, and they're not usually scaly, but they can be sort of have thickened patches of skin and stuff.
Like a toad skin is not too far off from what the gremlins are shown to have.
Yes.
There's some very almost scaly toads.
But even among mammals, if we want to stay with mammals, we do get species that change rather dramatically from young to adult.
Yes.
And we can also get very dramatic sexual dimorphism, where young and females look one way, and then males are, elephant seals, for example,
Yes.
where you've got the males who look basically like a different species.
Yeah, absolutely. They are size-wise and features-wise. You would not pair them together if you'd never seen that species before.
And I do like that you mentioned there was lore back in wartime of young and old and male and female doing different things.
Yes.
That there was this sort of, not a caste system necessarily the way insects do, but that's another thing we see in some species where young live their lives in a somewhat different way. They eat different things, or they're in a different part of their habitat than adults are, and males and females are doing different things.
Well, it's also got kind of the silverback gorilla thing where it's like, this is a feature that denotes maturity. Like, you don't have this feature growing up as a male gorilla, but when you are a mature male, you take on a new feature.
Yes. And Stripe in the movie has that, tuft of white
the
hair,
mohawk.
the mohawk of white hair on his head.
Yep. Yeah. As is often the case with monsters, they are such a mix of features.
Yes.
Because they are definitely behaviorally and physically more like mammals.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing that leans me back toward amphibian, which I just have to throw out there, is the way they reproduce.
That is true.
Is very Suriname toad.
They do pop out of the bags.
Yeah.
Now, I will say, and again, if we haven't, we're not settled quite yet, there are both primates and rodents and other mammals that will carry their young around on their backs.
Yeah, that's a good point. I like that too.
And so, if you came across a possum or something like that, it would be very easy to give the appearance that new ones are sprouting out of their back.
Well, especially if the young are meant to blend in. They have the same color fur as mogwais, and they have the same scaly skin as gremlins, and they hang on and don't move, and so it just looks like warts at a distance. But then if you disturb them, all of a sudden all these babies scurry off its back like a disturbed spider carrying its young.
And to go really specific into the lore of the movies, if you dropped it in water, they're all gonna come off the back so that they don't drown.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I do like that.
So it could be some sort of mammal that has them. I was speaking about the young, the idea, again, in pulling the film version of these,
which is probably where we're going to link, because it's my favorite and it's so good.
Well, and they're so... also, they're very visual.
Yeah, we have a distinct version to work with there. If we go with the World War II versions, which one? Which version do we go with?
Also, all of the people who are our listeners that saw Tiny Monsters and said, ooh, Gremlins?
Yep.
You're thinking about the movie.
Yep.
But thinking about the life cycle of them in the movies, they start out as cute little mogwai and then can become gross, mischievous, destructive gremlins. And that's another the thing that came to my mind when we were describing that is it is not an uncommon adaptation for wild species to be camouflaged or unthreatening as young, so that they are more protected. And younger animals are often cuter, or they might be have different coat patterns and stuff like that. Also, if you're going to be little and fuzzy, being fuzzy can help to stay warm when you're still little and need as much protection from the elements as you can get.
Oh, that gave me an idea that I don't know how well this actually works with the way I'm thinking about it, but there are some like domestic animals that if they get out will go feral and will like their coat will change as they're now having to survive differently. And I know pigs are famous for this. And I don't know if that happens in one generation, with one individual as quickly,
right,
or if it's more like the next generation. But to my knowledge, it is one of those where now that they're having to live differently and behave differently and their hormones are reacting differently from the stress, their coats will change and their behavior will shift.
Yeah.
And that gave me the idea of, because this is one of the things we talked about when we watched the movie, is the Mogwais growing into gremlins their natural life cycle, or is this something that, is this a bad thing? Because like
right.
Gizmo's very sad.
And in the cartoon, it sounds like they confirm that is a bad thing. That's not supposed to happen to them.
But what if that's just what humans think? What if it's a thing that either most of the time or as young are fuzzy and cute, but in stressful situations, they go through this feral change where they shed their fur and they become more aggressive. It could be a stress response, or it could be something, that it's like the next natural point that they go to then spread out or something.
Yeah.
But we like the fuzzy version, so we do everything we can to keep them from shifting.
Yes.
And that's why there are these rules of here's how you care. If you have a pet Mogwai, you need to take care of them, or else this horrible thing's going to happen to them, which is just a natural part of its cycle. But we think of it as this thing, and it's some sort of shift like that. So like a stress-free Mogwai could stay a Mogwai its whole life. And if it is a stress response, that could also explain why they become so aggressive and chaotic.
Yeah. It could also be a thing. I like that angle. It could if we want to keep it even easier to sort of conceive of with our lived experience, it could also be a thing where that is a thing that inevitably happens to Mogwai. People just get rid of them before that.
Right.
Like the same way that you have like certain pets like snakes and turtles and stuff where you get it and it's tiny and easy to manage, and then after a number of years it's too big or it's smelly or whatever, so people just throw it out, release it into the park or whatever. And now the wild invasive population is a bunch of gross adults that people don't want in their homes and such.
Yep.
There's also thinking about that shift into more of an aggressive sort of state. And this is a trick we've pulled in Spook-E in the past, but mating and sexual maturity. There are a lot of animals that will go into must. It could be something where there is some sort of trigger when they're in a certain situation or when they're socialized to a certain point that they start maturing and entering this social, more competitive state.
What if it's, because, the trigger is them eating after midnight. What if it's something where they need to get a certain nutrient from what they eat? Because there's lots of animals that, to have their reproductive cycle, they need certain chemicals and nutrients and particular things, and they get it from their diet and stuff. So like when I was working in the chestnut blight lab where we were raising the beetles to eat the chestnut blight aphids, or the reason that they were a safe introduced species, quote unquote, is because they need those aphids to be sexually productive. Without them, if they stop having that meal in their diet, they can't reproduce.
Yeah.
So maybe it's something where it's not actually that they can't eat after midnight, but they can't eat this thing or they mature.
Right. And if you want to bring in the midnight thing, if this is an ancestrally nocturnal species, it could be that whatever that food is just something that's available at night.
Precisely, like one of those flowers that blooms at night or something.
Or bugs that are active at nighttime.
So it's just, don't let them out to feed is the actual original warning.
Yeah.
Don't let your Mogwai out to feed after midnight.
Or make sure you feed them before the sun goes down so they're not hungry
exactly.
anymore.
Like, don't let them hunt after midnight, because they will probably mature into a gremlin, and then you won't be able to handle that. And then that just got reduced down to, don't feed them after midnight. Because that could be for maturing or for entering their mating phase. That either way, they need this chemical to have their version of puberty, and their version of puberty is turning into a gremlin.
Yeah. Well, and you can have animal. I mentioned elephant seals before, where the big, scary male elephant seal is something that only mature males achieve, and only certain mature males.
Yeah.
Like, not even all the males become that.
Yeah, there are plenty of male elephant seals that stay small, female-sized their whole life.
Yes. So it could be that you have this sort of polymorphic species that, in the right situation, when there's a big enough population, or when there's enough competition for resources or for mating rights, or when they have the right nutrients and the right food source, they are able to start taking on this other form that maybe is, ants like elephant seals. The function of it is to start controlling the population, controlling territory, establishing a mating ground, building nests. Like, that's this form of this species. Their job is to protect, which could make them more aggressive like elephant seals, to provide. So maybe there is this increased tendency to go out and forage, or to build, or to deconstruct. That this is the version of adult that is the making things right for the next generation,
Yes.
getting mates, setting a territory.
Mm-hmm. And we're using the example of elephant seals, which are very combative with each other.
Mm-hmm.
But there are plenty of animals that have mating behaviors where the males are cooperative.
Yes.
With each other. So there's no reason this has to be a dominance with each other. They might be more aggressive with each other at times, but there doesn't have to be a rival situation. They absolutely could mature and go, all right, now we're a gang, and we're going to go get food in bigger quantities because we can take down something bigger or find food more easily.
Mm-hmm.
And we're also going to establish bigger territories because we're all doing it together.
Yes.
And you absolutely can have cooperative forms of this sort of mating, intense mating behavior.
The other thing that I was thinking about before, and one of the things that put rodents in my head, is I like this. Rodents, this works with other mammals, that precedent of being small and cute, being social and troublesome, people bringing them into our homes to turn them into a pet and domesticate them. But also, there are certain species, particularly of rodents, who are famous for getting into not only human civilization and buildings and stuff, but vehicles.
Yes.
Like, rats on ships is a very famous thing that those animals do. And if this is a species that, especially if it's small, and especially if there is a history of domestication by people, this could be a species that is sort of like pigeons or like rats, had a natural habit that made them really good at then surviving in human-made structures.
Yep.
It's like pigeons, ancestrally, are cliff dwellers. And so when we built a bunch of skyscrapers, pigeons were like, great, this works perfectly.
Ooh, cliff dwelling also fits pretty well with primates.
Yes.
That would also make them, give them a similar advantage in a city situation.
Absolutely. Also, there are a lot of mammals that are burrowers,
Mm-hmm.
that are used to navigating through very tight, cramped spaces, sneaking through the walls and going through the machinery and stuff. The idea of a species that was, unbeknownst to us, pre-adapted for just living in an airplane.
Yep.
Like a big airplane, and creeping around in the machinery and things, or living on a ship, or other sort of complex structures that humans build.
Oh, that gave me two ideas that I had. One, which I don't think I actually want to go with, but I want to throw it out there just so it's on the recording. Because I like our idea of it being a form of maturity, or puberty-esque. But the other idea I had is that it could be some sort of like mange, like gremlins
True.
are sick mogwai. They've lost their hair and they are now sick and behaving erratically and aggressively because they are not well.
True.
I like the other one better, but that idea
also works.
It's interesting. The idea of them having behaviors that make them fitting for being in ships or planes also gave me the idea of why they would be targeting those things. And the first idea that came up was something along the lines of the woodpecker in the fuselage of NASA that it's your foraging method matches and targets stuff that's similar to what we're building our stuff out of.
Yeah.
That you peel bark off and stuff, so you're peeling back panels.
Right. Or you break open twigs and things to get the bugs out, so you're pulling wires apart.
Yep. You're going after vines and stuff or things like that.
I do like that. Also, the idea of it being a sexual maturity thing could lean into the idea of gathering materials.
Yes.
That this could also be a nest building behavior.
Yeah, kind of crow-esque.
Yeah, absolutely. Or like a bowerbird, where it's like, yeah, these wires are going to be great for packing the den or whatever.
Oh, I like that a lot because then it makes it, because we use red and blue wires and stuff, colors that you aren't always going to find readily in nature. So they'd be high, because like bowerbirds have that, where this bowerbird likes this color, it's going to find everything of that color it can. And a lot of times that's stuff we made because we can make pigments easier than nature can because we're using a wider variety of things.
Yes.
So they had this move like, oh, this is the reddest red I've ever seen. Give me all of the red. I'm going to take it back.
It also would make sense if they are living in the machinery, right? If they're living in the building, if they're living in the plane, then building your nest or your den out of stuff that the plane is made of also can help camouflage and hide the nest.
Very true. Very true.
It could be the angle of I'm grabbing unusual things to attract a mate like a bowerbird, but it could also be I'm grabbing what's around so that my young are protected. That could also, if there is, this is a little bit weird, but I did think this before, that could be part of why there are reports of them like wearing uniforms or wearing clothes, that they are either carrying it back to their nest or putting stuff on them to camouflage themselves.
Yeah.
Sort of like a caddisfly. And it might not be that they're like wearing a shirt, but have draped cloth over themselves so that they're harder to spot while they're sneaking around the bunks or whatever.
Yeah. Oh, another way to look at that is if they are primates, then they could absolutely, for certain things, be mimicking humans.
Absolutely.
I found some goggles. I see that you put them up to your face. So someone looked over and saw one holding them up to their face. Like, I've seen videos of monkeys looking through people's glasses.
Yes.
So, like, absolutely that could be happening. That also could explain their talking.
Yes.
Is mimicking words that they hear.
Well, and this is, we have circled back around to what was the answer that felt so fitting that I didn't want to automatically go with it. But primates works really well for a lot of what we're talking about. And if there are nocturnal primates, things that have like bush babies and eye-eyes and tarsiers that have those sort of lankier bodies.
Oh, yeah.
That are, eye-eyes are digging into trees and pulling bark apart.
They're nocturnal.
Yep.
They've got big ears. And they already have mythos around them being bad luck.
That's true.
And stuff.
And also, I might be incorrect about this, but that finger that they have, that long tapping finger, isn't particularly hairy.
No.
I don't think it's hairless necessarily, although I don't know off the top of my head. But it has that sort of like dark, leathery look to it.
I was going to say, they are thinly furred.
Yeah.
Like, they don't have a thick coat. So I could picture them losing their hair very easily compared to a lot of others.
Yes. Well, and especially if these are animals that are living in enclosed spaces, especially if they've adapted in any way to living in human-made structures, those are very warm places, and it might be that they just lost their fur because you don't need it.
Yes.
Now, the young could still have, you could still
Absolutely.
have that early life stage because you're young. The fur is helping for camouflage or just for protection. But then that mature version of them, the fur goes away either for some display reason or because it is no longer, especially if they're extremely active and building up a lot more body heat and they're crawling around in machinery and stuff. That lack of fur, that thin coat, could be an adaptation for not overheating.
Yeah. I like this
also,
a lot.
the big ears help with that too. They're radiating that heat.
I like this a lot.
It's an eye. We've made an eye gremlin.
Yeah, it's just tailless, and then it's basically the perfect shape. If it's a cousin of the eye that loses its tail,
and if they are focused, if ancestrally this is a group that is a little more ground dwelling, a little more inside stuff. This could be a species that is spending time inside of trees or inside of burrows or inside, in and among the roots. And if they're not doing as much climbing, that tail might have become reduced over time.
Yes.
That puts them, I don't know if there's a lot of burrowing primates.
Not to my knowledge. I can't think of any that I've ever heard of described as burrowing. I'm sure there are ones that go underground at times.
Yeah. You could certainly imagine a small nocturnal species of primate that has become... There are certainly more ground-dwelling primates. Chimps, for example, and gorillas are very ground-dwelling primates. And if they're small, like our gremlin primates are, they might be more able to go into burrows, go into tight spaces, inside of trees, throughout the underbrush, like inside of shrubs and stuff. And they become experts at taking apart their surroundings because their food is inside the logs or under the ground, or you have to get these roots out of the way or whatever.
Well, and I like the idea of them hiding in places like that. And if they aren't burrowers themselves, but they only use secondary, they will use abandoned burrows and they'll find knots and holes in trees and stuff.
Very common among animals to not dig their own burrows, but go in someone else's.
When we make a cubby space, we have basically made, and we see that happen with animals. Like, this is why birds will make nests in, your mailbox or your, the light fixture on your porch, because you've made a branch for them and they can't tell the difference between the metal and the wooden one. So they just find that space. So this could absolutely be you made a whole bunch of compartments in the plane. The wings are hollow. So if there was a way to get in there, that's a perfect place for them to go. And they just end up in all of the cubby spaces that we've created.
Yeah. So a species of basal primate. So, and if it's a basal group of primates, we can even justify them having claws.
Yes, absolutely.
Because early branches of the primate tree still have those little claws.
And if I remember right,
and the teeth. Yes. A lot of primates have big, sharper teeth.
Well, because eyes have exaggerated incisors because they use that to peel the bark off.
Yes.
So they have kind of fang-looking teeth on their, at least lower jaw. And they have not, if I remember right, it's been a while since I did the claws episode. They have not the true claws, but the claw-like nails.
Yeah. That
are the kind of the secondarily primate claw. So they do have claw-ish nails. So something either we could go very basal, but we could also just go to the base of eyes, probably.
Right.
And that would probably get us pretty darn close.
Somewhere in or closely related to eyes, a small cryptic species, so cryptic things that are often not seen.
Yes.
In the underbrush, high underground or whatever.
Oh, and it would make sense that they would be if they are sensitive to light.
That's true.
They're light pollution would mean that modern society would very rarely get a good look at them because they would be avoiding our bright light so thoroughly.
Yes. And that would also be, they hang out in enclosed spaces during the day so that they're safe, but also out of the light. So they're small and they're fuzzy and they carry the little babies on their backs. And in certain circumstances, when provided with the right conditions and the right nourishment, the right nutrition, some of them will enter this male elephant seal sort of more gregarious, more active, more reproductive minded state that they will then group together and become nuisances.
Yep.
Taking stuff apart, looking for food, building nests. And I do like the implication that style of reproduction and furthering the next generation isn't a necessary aspect of their life cycle.
Mm-hmm.
They can reproduce, or just more slowly or more in isolation, but they have the ability to do it this other way. And so when we bring them into our homes, we can deprive them of the triggers and the nutrition that they need to do that.
Yes.
And if we mess it up, they're going to start becoming these gremlin versions.
Yes. Another thought I had about them not liking our light pollution is that gives another great reason for them to be destructive.
That's true.
Is like the whole octopus taking out the light that's bothering it is just suddenly light bulbs are getting broken and light fixtures are getting pulled off the wall by these enraged, now sexually mature gremlins that have all of this testosterone or whatever hormone they're dealing with and are full of energy, so they see it and go, pull it off the wall.
Yeah, well, it could even be a part of that making a habitat suitable.
Yes, safe.
And safe for the young or for the rest of the group is blocking or turning off the light.
Yes.
That if you can break the light, once you've learned that all you have to do is break it and the light's gone, that's an easy lesson.
Yep.
Especially for primates.
Exactly. Like, all it takes is one accidentally doing it and the rest of the troop going, oh.
Excellent. We figured it out.
Oh man. It's the scene from Jumanji when all the monkeys are watching the Wizard of Oz. Yeah.
Also, to contribute just a little extra bit to the lore, the idea that a European soldier traveled to China or to some Asian country out east as part of their travels and got a little pet or got a handful of them and brought them home either to bring to their family or to try to make some money off of them, didn't know what to do.
Yep.
And then they became a feral population in the place they're bringing it back to, which is the military base.
Yes.
That you could absolutely imagine and this is a classic scenario of human goes to some other part of the world, grabs some species they shouldn't be taking with them, and then they get out and now they're invasive in this new part of the world.
Oh man. And
that now they're living in the plains and they're living in the jeeps because some person took an animal from where it shouldn't have come from.
That could also explain why the rules are vague
wrong.
And wrong, is it's a
Yes.
mistranslation. So they can't live with bright light. Bright light kills them, you say?
Yes, exactly.
It's don't get them wet. Their fur will mold.
Right.
Something like that. It's like, oh, I can't get them wet. Gotcha.
Yep.
Like no water. I like that a lot.
I do like that. I think that this is, a species. Off the top of my head, I don't know where eyes are from. But
I think they are lemurs.
Right.
So I think they're Madagascar.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure.
A species of early branching primate from Africa or Asia, somewhere in that sort of realm, that naturally developed into a social, cryptic, underground in trees and such, actively foraging, cleverly taking things apart, species that also has an alternate reproductive mode where they become more active and more gregarious and more geared towards nest building and creating a functional habitat, the way that beavers, the way that beavers will do that kind of thing, and primates today will often build nests and such. And then all of those features made them startlingly well adapted to then just start getting into human buildings and equipment and structures and stuff.
Yeah, I like it a lot.
I think that's super fun. Well, and also, if they're primates, they also have that thing where, they're gonna be creepy.
Yeah, they have a little bit of a human face.
Yeah, because eyes and lemurs are kind of creepy, especially if it was, a little, mostly hairless, and they've got the claws and teeth to help them manipulate their environment. Yeah, that's going to look like a little goblin creature.
Absolutely.
And people are going to be like, ugh, get it out of here.
There's a little person going through my garbage last night.
Yeah, and it was gross. Like, they would look super creepy, and that would be awesome.
I like it a lot.
That's super cool. I think these are very fun gremlins.
Ooh, I want one.
No,
I want one.
That's how we.
No, I will.
Do you want gremlins?
This is how we.
This is how you get gremlins.
I'll give you one. If I could have one, I'll give you one.
All right, we'll just get it a little bit wet.
Just a little bit wet.
Just enough to have two. Just enough to get two of them.
Around 11:45,
and then we'll
splash some water on it.
And then we'll both be extremely responsible. Why is this microphone not working?
So there's our gremlin.
I like that. That's
very pleased with this gremlin. I was convinced it was going to be amphibians when I was taking notes.
I could tell.
Because I had... they reproduce in water.
Yep. They have babies on their backs.
They're slimy. They metamorphose. Lots of things leaning toward amphibian. So I was convinced we would end up with some version. I like this a lot.
Yeah. Hey, listeners, if you come up with an amphibian version, let us know.
Yeah,
let us know what you thought of.
Look up Cernon Tobe as long as you don't have trypophobia. If
it were an amphibian, it could be related to our fish person.
Yes.
That we evolved way back in the first season.
Yep. Oh, if you have your own ideas for how gremlins could evolve, feel free to share them. There is a Spook-E channel in our Discord.
That's true.
So you can go there to share your thoughts about this version of the gremlin.
Please do.
And if you are so inspired to make fan art, artistic representations of any of the creatures that we evolve this season or in past seasons, please share them. We love to see them. They are one of our favorite parts about getting to do Spook-E.
Yes.
And if you are up for us putting them on our website, tag us so that we can see it wherever you post it. Tag us or put it on the Discord and let us know if you're cool with us putting it on the website and how you'd like to be credited.
Yep.
We have a whole section on our fan art page on the website of previous years of Spook-E. So if you want to see some of what's been done in the past, go check them out because, oh my gosh, they're so cool.
We have very talented listeners.
People are so creative and awesome.
It's awesome. So if you are arting Spook-E, let us know. Let us see it. We'd love to see it.
And with that, we will call it. It's almost midnight, so...
Almost midnight. So we gotta eat. We gotta eat real quick.
Yeah, before it's too late.
This is but the first episode of Spook-E for 2024.
Stay tuned for next Saturday where the next episode will come out.
Yeah, every Saturday in October, new episodes of Spook-E. And longtime listeners will be thrilled to hear that Cute-E will be making a return. So there will be 5 episodes. And then, for those of you who can't get enough, on November 9th, we will be having a Spook-E live stream.
Yes.
So keep an eye on the website and on our social media for more updates as they come out.
Until then...
Did I ever tell you why I hate Christmas?
Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to the Common Descent podcast. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and check our WordPress blog for pictures and links after each episode. Huge thanks to our patrons whose support helps keep this podcast running and who get access to bonus goodies on Patreon. The song you're hearing is called On the Origin of Species by Protodome, which we found at ocremix.org. Thanks again for listening. We hope you'll join us next time.